undocumented immigrants. When I say undocumented, I don't necessarily mean that these are people involved in identity theft, another Grace myth, or that are here breaking major laws. Many people arrived here with visas that lapsed. They fell out of status and so on and so forth. Most of them are workers. And the situation was pretty bad between 1986 and 2003 because something unprecedented started happening. And that is, before 1986, there were very, very few people, notably in cases like the ones mentioned by Jonathan. There were some horrendous cases of people, smugglers, actually stranding Mexicans in train cars and locking them in, and 50, 60 dying horrible death in the desert at one time. But in general, deaths as a result of migration to this country were almost non-existent. But then the geniuses in the immigration service decided to start placing barriers through the points of access on the part of immigrants. That would be Tijuana in particular and Ciudad Juarez. And then they actually patted themselves a few years later on the shoulder because guess what? Fewer undocumented immigrants were crossing into the United States via Tijuana. They were being pushed into the desert, the Arizona desert. And so immigration had not decreased. Immigration had continued apace. It's just that it became much more dangerous. And as a result, we're now observing about 300 people dying every year, and those are the people that are found as a result of their efforts to cross the Arizona desert. Okay, you're saying, well, it serves them right because they shouldn't be breaking our laws. Everybody wants to come to the United States, and our pie is not large enough. Okay, fine, that's the way you think, that's okay. But then you have to reflect upon whether a badly imagined law is more important than the well-being and the life of people whose basic sin is to want to work and provide services in this country. But then things got even worse because as the situation became more punitive along the U.S.-Mexico border, please understand that right now the Border Patrol is the second largest arms-bearing force in the United States, second only to the military service. And we're using that mostly in order to prevent immigrants from Latin America to cross the border. You might imagine, well, that's what we want. We want to keep them out. Okay, well, they're not staying out. Actually, what they're doing is they're bringing their families in because they can no longer travel back and forth. You see what I'm saying? We used to have a kind of cyclical migration that would enable them to work here and then visit their hometowns on a regular basis. But because the cost, both financial and human, has risen so much, now more families are here. So as a result, according to the studies by Massey in particular, the expansion of the undocumented population in the United States is an unintended consequence of more punitive policy, you see? That's the problem, because tied with increasing hostility, what do we expect the children who are growing up here to do when they reach that very perilous age, the teenage years? Final point here, and then I will conclude with a few facts. Well, things were going to get worse. Because in the post-2000 9/11 period, the Immigration and Naturalization Service was dismembered, basically abolished, dismembered, and it was folded into the Department of Homeland Security, which, as you remember, has as a mandate to protect us from terrorist threats. Is that correct? Yes. So it's supposed to protect us from terrorist threats. But when the Immigration Service was folded into Homeland Security, it de facto transformed immigration into a security matter. So that regardless of provenance, all migrants, all immigrants are perceived and treated as potential terrorist threats. That's how we ended up arresting the Polish woman in the Hillsborough Detention Nursing Center, because in the eyes of the law and in the actions of bureaucracy, that Polish woman is pretty much like a real terrorist. And when she is detained, I mean, it's not a pleasant thing. She's actually taken away in handcuffs and shackles. A mother working as a laundress in a nursing home. So perhaps the most lamentable aspect of this situation is its superfluity, because immigration, whether legal or illegal, has never constituted a major problem for for the United States. And Latin Americans living in this country hardly present a security threat. When given an opportunity, they have assimilated like other groups, regardless of what Tom Tancredo says. Only ignorance and fear among large segments of the population, in tandem with opportunism on the part of politicians, can explain the present state of things. So let me provide you with a few facts. The first fact, which I ask you to bear in mind when you are having conversations about this problem, is this. The United States allocates a very small number of visas to semi-skilled and unskilled workers. As I said, the kinds of workers that we are creating huge demand for. So that part of what is creating the present situation is that the demand is there for these workers. It's not just that they come driven by their own dreams and desires. That would be the supply factor. It's that demand is there, you see. But the laws of immigration are totally out in sync with the realities of the labor market. So what I want to know is why those fantastic people who are constantly singing the praise of the market, let the forces of the market work, supply and demand, that's what works. That's what makes our country great. But when it has to do with the labor market, then suddenly we want government to prevent and to distort this correspondence between supply and demand. So if you have very few visas allocated, Mexico, a country with which we have a long history, our second trading partner, okay, a country with whom we have the North American Free Trade Agreement, which, by the way, is part of this story, but I don't want to go there right now. I'd be happy to answer your questions. This is a country that is a peaceable neighbor that has, in fact, if I remember correctly, okay, shall we go there? I mean, Mexico actually did not have a war with the United States. I think it was the United States that had a war with Mexico, as a result of which it appropriated about half of its territory. No hard feelings. It's okay. All I'm saying is that this has been a country with a consistent trajectory of peace, with which we have important trading relationships. And that country, so close to us, receives the same number of visas as Palau. I'm only exaggerating like a little bit, okay? Very little. So in other words, when you have this kind of lack of balance between the visas allotted and the realities of the labor market, you're guaranteeing illegality.